I'd like to call to order the work session for August 30th, 2021. We are all present. We have one item on the agenda tonight. Of course, Council, I'd like to remind Council that staff will be pausing intermittently to answer any questions. So number one on the agenda today is a discussion on the Avondale Goodyear Transit Study. And our transit person, Ms. McMurdy, will please introduce your guest and yourself.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I am Christine McMurdy, Engineering Project Management Coordinator. With me tonight are Jennifer Valentine and William Randolph from MAG, and James Gamez, Principal with Nelson Nygaard. In the city's current strategic plan, we have a quality of life goal to complete an evaluation of public transit options, identify unmet needs, and evaluate funding requirements with results and recommendations presented to you. The Avondale Goodyear Transit Study addresses all of these tasks. We're here tonight to present the findings of this MAG-facilitated study focusing on Goodyear. We want to hear your thoughts on these options. Where should we focus? What do you want to know more about? We're going to move relatively quickly through existing conditions to set the stage for this discussion, and then focus on the recommendations followed by your questions and comments. We are going to pause in the middle to give you that opportunity. And with that, I'll turn the presentation over to James.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is James Gamez. I'm with Nelson Nygaard. We're a sustainable transportation planning firm, and we've been working closely with Christine, as well as a representative for the City of Avondale and MAG to develop this study over the past 14 months. This study, the primary purpose was to evaluate the transit needs in both Avondale and Goodyear. Our study area included both of the two cities. We also looked at some of the regional travel patterns as well. So some of the graphics that we show today will focus both on local as well as regional transit needs. Okay, so the study timeline is shown on the screen currently, and there were three primary phases of the project. We began with an analysis of existing transit conditions as well as a review of best practices. We looked at cities across the United States that were similar to Avondale and Goodyear in a lot of ways, including density as well as proximity to a major regional center. Then we also conducted 2 rounds of outreach for both the community as well as invited stakeholders. Our second phase of the project was when we developed some initial concepts or recommendations that we took out to the community as well as stakeholders, and we received feedback on those ideas as well as from city staff, and then we refined those into recommendations, and that was the third phase of this project. So the evaluation of existing transit services looked at the way that transit, fixed route, as well as paratransit and van pool are designed and operate and function here in Goodyear as well as in Avondale. We also looked at the current population and employment conditions. We looked at things such as demographics and socioeconomics and how they're evolving, how they're projected to grow into the future.
Excuse me.
We also looked at some of the innovative services that are being offered in places like Sacramento, Austin, and Seattle. And then with the community and stakeholder discussions, we had 2 surveys that went out to the community and were shared. We had over almost 700 responses from the community, so we got some really positive feedback, just informative feedback from the community about transit needs and preferences. With the stakeholder discussions, we talked to several members of the community, and they also provided very helpful input that we'll summarize in just a moment. So thinking about existing transit service, fixed route, the portfolio of fixed route services that are offered here in Goodyear include local buses that operate on primary corridors such as McDowell and Van Buren, and they travel a very long distance, but they make local or regular stops every couple of blocks. Then you also have the Avondale Zoom circulator route, which primarily operates within Avondale, but also touches portions of Goodyear and Tullison, and that gets people around the portion of the West Valley. We also have 2 express routes, one that serves Goodyear and then another in Avondale, and the 562 Goodyear Express connects the Goodyear Park and Ride with downtown Phoenix. Paratransit is intended for users of transit that cannot take the fixed route system, and that gives them an opportunity to go point for point, as long as they're within 3/4 of a mile of a regular bus stop. And then vanpool is something that's also offered to the community, and a lot of employees of some of the major employers here in Goodyear travel to their workplaces in groups of about 6 to 15. All right, so next graphic just shows how those services are distributed across the West Valley, and they traverse the study area from east to west. But we also show on the right side of the screen when these services operate. So weekday, Saturday, and Sunday, the service levels vary pretty significantly. We have local routes and circulators and express routes that all run on weekdays. They run from fairly early in the morning till late at night, some during peak hours only. And then on Saturday, express routes do not operate. The frequency of service, or how often the buses come by, reduces on Saturday. But on Sunday here in Goodyear, you do not have local bus service. Only the Zoom operates. Next, I'm going to talk about some of the opportunities and challenges that we're seeing here, as well as into the future. So one thing that's clear is that the population and employment here in Goodyear has grown very significantly since 1990. Mm-hmm. It's on its way to surpass Avondale, but there's also been just a lot of growth in the last 5 years or so. So the next, this slide as well as the next one shows how much development has occurred within the last 5 years, and I'll run that one more time just to show how much infill development has occurred in a lot of different ways. There's a combination of single-family housings, more mixed-use housing that really wasn't there in the past, as well as commercial warehousing development across Goodyear. And this has led to a boom in the population as well as the employment. And this is only expected to continue over the next 20 years as population employment is expected to double here in Goodyear. As I mentioned earlier, we also looked at the regional travel patterns or commute patterns for Avondale and Goodyear. And what we found is that many of about 4 out of 5 Avondale and Goodyear residents actually do not work within this area, the West Valley, but they work outside, primarily in Phoenix and other areas to the east, whereas about 1 out of 5 live and work within the West Valley. And then for people who are traveling to Goodyear or that work in Goodyear, the vast majority, or more than half, are coming from outside. But there's still a sizable population that both lives and works within the West Valley. Next, I'm going to transition to transit ridership and just show how things have changed and how it's evolving for the past couple of years. So obviously the pandemic resulted in a major hit for ridership, but this was seen by transit agencies, municipalities across the country last spring. Since then, there's been a slight increase in ridership. We expect this to continue. We've seen a more of a gain in some of the local services, such as the Zoom, such as the 3 and the 17, but the express routes are still running a very small number of riders per trip currently. As a lot of folks who take those types of services work in offices in downtown Phoenix have the opportunity to work from home still. I also want to talk a little bit about just how transit riders are different, and there's really not any one way that you could design transit services. You have to think about all the different types of people who can use transit and what their various needs are. So here we have 5 different market groups that aren't meant to represent all the different types of transit users, but a lot of them. And some of the key stats that we found when investigating the West Valley is that Goodyear has a large senior population. About 1 out of 6 residents are over the age of 65 years old. Young people who are almost twice as likely to take transit than those that are older than 25 make up about 12% of the population here in the West Valley. And then we also looked at things such as vehicle ownership. And we found that the percentage of households that do not own a vehicle is very low, only about 2% of households, but about 1/4 of households only have 1 vehicle. So that was relatively interesting. And we also want to just think about how different types of employees have different needs, different work shifts, and the way that we might design transit services to best serve them. The next graphic just shows some of the most common destination types that we see for transit, and these are destinations currently here in Goodyear and Avondale that had a lot of ridership, such as Sherry Mountain Community College in Avondale, some of the major shopping centers, some of the major corridors. Goodyear is developing its own town center, so we expect that to be a major draw with all of the destinations that'll be there, both governmental as well as the adjacent mixed uses. And then the distribution centers that have been popping up in Goodyear are major employers, and those are not currently served by transit really well. And then we also have parks and recreations facilities, which the city is expanding. Two of the major uncertainties whenever we started this study about a year ago was the UZA status. So the Avondale Goodyear urbanized area, which the map on the right shows how it's separate from the larger Phoenix Mesa UZA, and just how that might change with the results of the 2020 census. And then the other one was the Prop 400, not knowing exactly what the sales, the amount that the region would go after. And now that has been determined to be 0.5 cent to continue that vote here in the near future. It is also very likely that the UZA status will change, and the Avondale Goodyear UZA will be merged into the larger urbanized area. So that'll have really major implications to funding, and Avondale Goodyear will not be able to use some of the federal transit funding for operations like they have been for a long time. So that's something to be aware of as we start to plan for the future and look to fund transit service. We also want to just think about the way that perceptions are changing for transit. There's been a sort of a renewed focus or a stronger focus on transportation equity, how to allocate service, and just being aware of how transit is designed and who it's serving. And also, there's been strong interest from various members of the community, existing transit users, non-transit users, stakeholders, for on-demand service or service that can get people more point-to-point than a regular bus can. So rather than walking to a bus stop, taking the bus, walking from the bus stop to get to your destination, having service that operates more like a Uber or Lyft to get people where they need to go. And then finally, just more attention to rider comfort, and specifically bus stops as well as transit facilities is something to think about over the next several years. For the next slide, I just want to pause and share and give you a little bit of time to read some of the comments that we received from the community. As I mentioned, we had almost 700 responses, so there's no way we can share all of them here during the meeting today, but just wanted to share some of those that represented many of the topics that were brought up from members of the community. And we asked them a lot of questions just about their travel patterns and things that they would like to see or wouldn't like to see, but we also gave them an opportunity to just share just open-ended feedback. So some of those comments focused on things like upgrading fixed route service, operating 7 days a week, trying out microtransit that they've heard of in other cities, other communities, and that's the more on-demand service that I was just speaking about a moment ago. Looking at flexible routes to serve some of the areas that are hard to get to currently and that require a really long walk from a bus stop. And then mobility hubs was something that we shared with the community as a way to kind of bring together all these different modes, including not just transit, but cycling, walking, other forms of transportation into like mini transit centers. And that was something that the community was interested in. So next, I also want to share with you some of the feedback that we received from stakeholders. So these were invited members of the community that represented different major employers, different organizations that could relate to us some of the things that they're hearing from their clients, constituents, and customers. And there was a variety, a wide range of feedback that they provided, such as improving access to from some of the low-income areas to places where people need to go for basic needs. Also thinking about how transit can serve some of the new development that's occurring throughout Goodyear. And then looking at, again, some of those non-traditional transit options. There was also an interest in things like bike share, scooter share, and I think those are things that Christine could probably speak to later. And then next I want to talk about just how there's a strong foundation for success. We're not, this study was looking at ways to expand and enhance and optimize transit service, not start from the ground up. There's already a solid foundation for transit here within Goodyear. with the local route service as well as the express service. The Goodyear Park and Ride is a great facility, something other cities can aspire to. And there's a lot of other things that the city is doing that's going to help support transit and is in line with transit supportive development, such as a lot of the mixed use that's being planned. The map on the right shows a lot of the residential that's being planned, and the vast majority of that is higher density housing, so that's going to be able to support transit. And then also the future Goodyear Civic Square is going to be a major destination in the region. All right, with that, I'll pause. Before getting into the recommendations, I'd like to stop and see if there's any questions from the council.
Council, questions? Bill?
I just had a quick one, and it didn't dawn on me earlier. You talked about the Avondale Goodyear UZA going away and whatnot. Is there an opportunity for us to expand that current UZA maybe to include Buckeye or go further south?
Yeah, Mayor, council member Stipp, unfortunately, we don't have a say in that. We've actually already been notified by the Census Bureau that the Avondale Goodyear cities will be absorbed into the larger Phoenix Mesa UZA. So.
Okay, thanks.
And that's based on the combined population of Avondale and Goodyear exceeding 200,000. It's a done deal, pretty much.
Wally?
I have a couple of questions. For the surveys that you sent out, you sent all over Goodyear, not just one section, correct?
We reached out to the community.
Because we have 2 zip codes, so we had surveys that went to both zip codes, did we not?
We shared them through social media, through Facebook, Nextdoor, app, Twitter. Many of the neighborhood organizations also shared those. So we try to share them with as many people as possible.
You didn't mail it out, you just shared it online or whatever.
It was advertised on the websites. I don't think we did.
Because I never saw it, and,
Yeah,
I'm on Nextdoor, and I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, and I never saw any of this. But I'm curious how you got 700 responses back if it's just all online or in Focus or whatever.
Yeah.
And can you give me how many from the north of I-10 versus the south of I-10 that responded?
We did ask questions about which zip code people lived in, so that can be provided.
Now that's because that's important to us to know where the greatest need is, apparently, because.
We can be sure to include that in the report, those stats.
Okay. And I have the express bus that you keep mentioning that's just nonstop from here to downtown. Is there any indication that we could be able to have a bus that goes downtown and comes back in the morning rather than go downtown in the morning and you have to wait till 4 or 5 o'clock to come back home?
Councilmember Campbell, that is actually a very strong recommendation we've made to MAG for the extension of Proposition 400 to allow reverse commutes, which is what you're describing.
Yeah, well, we've been talking about this for years. Years. We've asked for bus service that, because those of us that do not work downtown would like to use the bus to go downtown, but I don't want to go down at 6:30 or 7 in the morning and then I can't come home until 5 o'clock at night or 4:30, whatever. So if we had a better, if we could offer a better time route for our residents, I think we would get a better turnout for people that would really rather ride a bus than drive the freeway to Phoenix.
Yeah, that type of model of service has been successful in other suburban communities where it runs all day in both. It may not be every 30 minutes, but maybe it's every hour, every 2 hours.
Yeah, that's better than nothing.
Right.
I mean, well, it's not, we don't have nothing, I'm sorry. But that would be wonderful if we could offer something like that, because that's a start. Mm-hmm. And then we could gauge how many riders we have, and then we would know if we need to increase it. So, because it's all based on ridership.
It's right. So right now, the average ridership per trip for the Goodyear Express has been really low. It's been, I haven't checked in the last couple of weeks, but prior to that, it was in like single digits in some of the trips some days. So until that increases, I think that's going to have to occur first. Get it back to where it was before, and then look at filling in those midday trips. But
well, unfortunately, so many now of those workers are working from home, and before I can remember people complaining to us that by the time the bus came from Buckeye to Goodyear, there was no seats left, and they were standing all the way downtown. So, you know, we've got a cultural change here going on, so that's not going to help us too much. Okay, and my last question is, what is Route 562? Is that the one just going straight downtown?
Yes, that
Okay.
is the route.
Perfect, thank you.
Sherry?
I have a question. When you surveyed and looked into different populations with all the new building on Bullard, I noticed at 7:20 in the morning, it is backed up, I assume, to get into Amazon all the way from them to I-10. I mean, it's straight. Have we talked to them or reached out to them as part of this program to see about them doing the van for their people to bring them in?
They were invited to participate on the study, and actually I've had conversations with one of the organizations that does the planning for Amazon and for Microsoft. They're very interested in trying to kind of bridge that first mile, last mile is what we call it in transit, because the Van Buren route currently ends at Central Avenue on Van Buren, and if we could extend it a little bit further, they want to find a way that they can get some of their shift workers, which is something James mentioned that we're going to talk a little bit more about. It gives them the opportunity to maybe get a service that's going to get them a little bit closer, or if we do set up these transit hubs, then there is an opportunity for them to grab a bike, grab a scooter, whatever, and make that last couple of feet to the building. But that corridor, that Bullard corridor is a huge focus of a lot of my effort right now, because I am getting interest, I am getting questions and feedback that they would like to see the service extended. So that's something we're going to hope we can influence through the extension of Proposition 400, because that's going to be a regional service, just like the Express Bus is a regional service.
And then I got two more quick ones. The other one is the Zoom, which is a really good service if you get on it at the right place and you want to get off of it at the right place. Otherwise, you have to do this whole, I don't know if there's a way to do a mini route or a mini loop.
We're going to get into that.
That's,
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's what's coming. No, it's a great question.
And then don't forget about Estrella, because we're kind of like a
I
little.
can't wait for you
Okay.
to see it.
We're a little transportation desert, so.
We're going to fix that.
Joe?
Was any of your survey questions, are you willing to pay an additional tax to expand bus service, or if so, how much?
that was, I think it was for the second survey, we asked that question. I'm not sure if it was how much, but it was, would you be willing to pay more?
I
have
don't
that
think we
response?
stipulated the exact amount. We asked if there was interest in contributing more toward transit service. And I believe the results were positive. Yeah, we were pretty happy to see that. But it was framed in a way that we didn't
It didn't say
stipulate
the
the
word
amount.
tax, is what
Yes,
you're
we
telling
didn't
me.
say that. We didn't stipulate an amount. We just asked the question, is this something that you would be interested in investing more? And we had positive reaction to that.
I'm wondering if you'd get a different response if you said, are you willing to pay another half-cent sales tax?
Since we didn't know at the time what MAG was going to be proposing for the regional half-cent sales and the regional tax, we were not in a situation where we could say what we felt was representative of what we were working on.
Yeah, I think at some point it would be nice to kind of get that answer.
Yeah.
I don't know if 700 people will get us a piece on that, but I think that's kind of an important answer.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more.
Half to a percent. I proposed that.
Yeah, you
I
did.
can tell you. the
I remember.
reaction At MAG.
Yeah.
And I definitely, I worked at well, I've been saying it from the beginning.
Yes.
So it wasn't just a surprise to
Right.
everybody there. I said, let's try not to be so political, and let's furnish the amount we need to finish these projects. And I did win on that. Yes, Brandon?
Yeah, I know you mentioned some things here, a lot of different things, but was the rideshare or the Uber type use, Lyft type use in here as well?
Ride choice falls under paratransit. We're not really going to be covering that tonight because we pretty much, the ride choice is really working great. We actually hit 90 trips in a month.
Oh, good.
Recently, and that's really terrific. But what you're bringing up with on-demand with Uber and Lyft, that's where we're going next.
Okay. I mean, that's probably people, that'd probably be the optimal. I can go wherever I want, whenever I want, and get back whenever I want. That's probably the dream. I don't know if we can afford that.
We're
dream,
going to get
but-
there.
Yeah.
We're going
Thank
there
you.
next.
So
So I have a question. When you talk about sharing, for the manufacturer and warehousing, all that, have you approached them about a partnership in the fact that they would contribute financially to this, and we'd have some, partnership on this?
James is going to talk a little bit about that in a couple of slides, but I will tell you that we don't want to put anything in front of a company unless we know exactly what we want to offer them.
Well, I agree.
Yeah, so what we're going to be proposing is very new, very different, and we need your reaction in order to be able to kind of move in that direction.
Okay, I have one more observation. I've had a long time in Goodyear, and now that we're advancing and really doing trees and doing everything, I don't think the bus stops are comfortable. They look hot. I'm sure when they sit there, is it metal? Because it looks like metal. And so my feeling is, let's make it inviting. Let's do some shrubbery. Let's do some cup holders. Let's do some things that, people need in the morning. Because, everybody runs out with a cup of coffee. All right, they're going to have it on there. So let's do a cup holder. Let's do colors that are inviting. Let's make it inviting that you want to sit there. Because right now, I don't.
Great comments,
Yeah.
Mayor, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
What about a cover too, Mayor?
Pardon me?
Cover for the heat?
Oh, no, they have to. That's not a cover.
It's not a
That's
cover, no.
torture.
It is.
It's
It's too hot.
You can't hide from it. It's just, and look what we had this summer. Would you get on a bus summer? Would you stand there and wait? No. So it really needs to be improved.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other comments? No? All right, go ahead.
Okay, so before I move on to recommendations, I did want to clarify the response regarding the sales tax question that we asked on the survey. So we did mention, we provided an example of Tempe with their additional half-cent sales tax. So we didn't, although we didn't say the exact amount, we give that example. And 65% of the respondents said that yes, they would support an additional sales tax. 17% said no, and then 18% said, I'm not sure.
Well, those are good figures. I can tell you, several cities have said to me in MAG, Mayor, because when we talk about transit, you need to get a tax for it. You're the only one that doesn't have a tax. So,
Well, that's not true.
yeah. Well, I know there's some that don't have a tax, but like Mesa and some of those, they have tax. So
Let's show you what we want to
I
recommend.
think you have more power in negotiating there. Okay. All right.
All right, so moving on to recommendations. We have several that we'd like to share, but we want to start off with fixed route recommendations. And one of them includes the Bullard, Yuma Road, this area here, just south of here, where there's been so much growth. And one of the recommendations, and this has been in just close collaboration with Christine, extending the Route 3 to this area here to serve a lot of the new employment and growing employment in this area. Another one that more so affects the city of Avondale is extending the Route 29 Thomas Road along Thomas Road to Avondale Boulevard, connecting with not only their park and ride, but their civic center. And then increasing the amount of service that's on the 17 McDowell, adding Sunday service to that route, so it'll be 7 days a week. So those are the Valley Metro routes that primarily go east-west, and they go all the way past Phoenix. And then the other recommendation regarding the Avondale Zoom route, that's the route that's currently the loop that was mentioned. And the recommendation there is to eliminate about a third of that route and have it operate sort of like more like the dark blue line that's shown on the map here. So that's using the most productive segments of that route. It'll allow it to be more two-way, so that you don't have to ride around for such a long period of time. And service can, the amount of savings from that particular route, from shortening it, can be applied to either introducing microtransit or to just increasing the amount of frequency on that route. We think that introducing microtransit is probably the best way to go because there was really strong interest for that. So that would be the next slide. So Microtransit is a type of service that's much more, it's much newer than fixed route service. We've seen it grow in a lot of cities similar to Avondale and Goodyear. The graphics on the right are from Sacramento, and it's the towns just to the northeast of Sacramento that are within the Sac RT district, and such as Folsom, Citrus Heights, South Sacramento, and all these different areas that are shown on that bottom map have their own unique microtransit service. So these types of routes, they may look like paratransit vehicle, but they operate more like Uber and Lyft. You don't have to call it a day in advance. Anybody can ride. You mostly use an app to hail the trip, and then it gets to where you're at, or at least close to where you're at within about 20 minutes, and then takes you in a fairly direct path where you want to go. The difference then from Uber and Lyft is that this vehicle has there's other people on board, so it's a shared ride vehicle. It's transit, but it's a smaller version, and it doesn't really take you door to door. It's more so curb to curb. So the pickup locations might be a couple of blocks away at an intersection rather than in front of your house. Instead of taking you directly to your employment might drop you off 500 feet away or things like that, so that it's still very convenient. And it's been very successful. We talked to staff at SAC-RT, talked to staff from other places, as well as some of the microtransit providers. These are mostly private companies that many of these cities and transit agencies contract with on a turnkey basis, and they run the service, they provide the vehicles, they ensure that at least some of them are wheelchair accessible, so that if somebody with the wheelchair needs to use the service or wants to use that service, they can respond in a timely manner. It doesn't really provide doesn't carry as many riders as fixed route transit as you can expect, because it's a smaller vehicle, but it's still very productive in a lot of areas with land uses that can't support very frequent fixed route service. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might
questions?
have about
So,
Go ahead.
oh, yes, Wally?
I just had a question. You mentioned that it's not necessarily door to door, and you may drop you off a couple of blocks from your home or something. So do these communities, Citrus
Wally,
Heights?
would you bring your microphone
I'm sorry.
for me?
Do
please?
these communities that have this service, do they have a bus waiting zone? Do they have someplace to sit? This sounds wonderful, but in the summer, I don't think it's doable to drop someone in 118-degree heat 2 or 3 blocks from their home.
Yeah, I should clarify. So it can be door to door, and some cities do operate more door to door. The majority have curb to curb, but it can be either one. It's more of a policy decision which way you want to go. If it's curb to curb, then those locations are identified before the service even starts up. But that's totally something that would be up to council.
So I see the seniors wanting to use something like this, but they would want to be picked up at their home, taken to where they need to go, pick up from there, and then taken back to their home, not dropped a block away or something. I don't think that would work too well for the seniors.
Well, I had a question there because we're not planning on that, I gather.
Now, tonight, we want to present you with this as an opportunity and get your feedback, so you're giving us that feedback right now.
Well, I think for industry, for the workers, I think that would be positive.
Yeah. We have a few more on microtransit, and maybe that'll be a kind of clarify the picture for you.
So
Sherry?
next-
Oh, I'm sorry. 2 quick questions. With the Zoom route, I couldn't quite see on the map. I was trying to figure out that part of it would still go to the Costco, right? You just would take a second Zoom over there, or you'd lose that
No.
part? Because that seems to be a popular area. So.
Right. There's, they've got Costco, we've got Target, so there's that, that's why we do so many things together, is to try to find a way that we can facilitate those.
But there's a way to take one Zoom and then get on the second Zoom, right?
Actually, there's only one Zoom right now, and what James is proposing is something a little bit smaller so that it runs a little more often. But I'm not going to get too much into the Zoom because Avondale is actually looking at making changes again.
Oh, okay.
So it could be that that whole route changes. We just don't know yet. They've got a new transit manager. He actually started today. And he's actually really, really good. He came from Glendale and created the GUS. So we're going to be talking a lot more in these next couple of months about those major activity centers and where people really want to go. We're kind of up here, and we're going to slowly start to kind of get down a little bit closer to things like activity centers, where the people are, where they want to go, and then also addressing things like our vulnerable population. The nice thing about Microtransit, too, as it relates to that, is these buses, like James had mentioned, are wheelchair accessible. That would probably peel some people off Dial-A-Ride or Ride Choice if we would make this another option just as attractive, just as accessible for them. That kind of also reduces our liability, our cost on paratransit service. So we definitely have reason to look a little bit closer at trying to reach our seniors so that there isn't that burden of how can they get there, because they genuinely want the service.
And then would there be a cost for the microtransit?
We're going to,
Oh, I'm sorry.
that's okay.
We'll get to the cost in just a moment, but a couple other things I want to mention about microtransit that aren't on the slide is that the cities that have been successful, such as Arlington, Texas, Sacramento, Austin, Texas, somewhat, is that they start really small with their zones. They don't go citywide. They start with an area that they know is going to work, that has a lot of origins and destinations, and they, over time, expand that as they see ridership grow. And the other benefit of starting small is that the response time can be relatively short. So that's why Sacramento has so many unique areas, as they're shown here, is because they don't span some of the areas that don't generate much ridership, such as industrial areas and highways. So they're kind of isolated in communities themselves. So that's one other thing to consider. And all of this, sort of the best practices are included in our report as well. But speaking specifically about Goodyear and where we think microtransit will be effective, the area that we identified as the initial pilot zone is east of Cotton Lane and roughly from the ballpark north to I-10. And then there's also a northern thumb or extension up to the future Goodyear Civic Square. So that's defined there on the east side of Cotton. There's also a lighter shaded segment over or area west of Cotton that could be a future expansion zone. And then the map on the left side of the screen shows Estrella Mountain Ranch, how longer term that could be another area to consider, as well as some of the infill development occurs, and as well as just the need increases. We think there's going to be people who are living out there today that maybe won't want to drive in the future, so that might increase the demand over time. Any questions about the zones?
I have a question, and I should have looked it on the budget, and I didn't. What does it cost us for Avondale and the Zoom? I mean, we need that to decide, do you want to continue? Do we find something else that, we can put that money into?
So we're committed this fiscal year. You've already approved the IGA. The IGA that you approved for Zoom, just Zoom, is about $239,000. Keeping in mind that that's still got federal assistance in it. So currently, and for the entire life of the Zoom so far, we've had 50% of the operating cost covered by the Federal Transit Administration. So in reality, when that UZA money goes away, that same IGA would cost $470,000 for that one piece of Zoom. And that's one of the motivating factors behind this conversation. Now that we've tried it and that operating assistance is going away, we need to start looking at something that's more productive, that's going to reach our residents. As we heard in the citizen satisfaction survey, there's a desire for more. We're just trying to figure out, with your help, whether any of these options are things that might work, get us in that direction. But I do want to revisit what James said. You always start small with a service like this. You try it in one area, see how it goes, and then you try to find ways to replicate it, because, of course, word of mouth also helps too. When people hear that there's something going on in one area of Goodyear, they're going to reach out and ask you, well, when is that coming to me? So that's why we're working with this, because it actually works very well in areas that are very similar to Goodyear. We are spread out, our densities are spread out. We can't, a typical 40-foot bus is not going to work. So we're trying to find something that maybe is different from a Zoom, different from a fixed route bus, but still meets that need for our community, which is smaller vehicles, a little more nimble on service, definitely more comfortable in terms of where they wait. And we've got a few more things to show you in that regard.
I think it's a good strategy.
All right, so next we've outlined a potential pilot service plan and how you might ramp up over time and change some of the policies and just expand. So what some cities have done is start fare free initially, and to say that you're going to start fare free, but also say that you're going to implement a fare so that we can expect that, know that it's coming. But just as a way to just create excitement and interest, awareness for the service, and then shortly thereafter implement a fare. Look to expand from weekdays to Saturdays as well, increase the service hours to be able to work for people who work later shifts. And then as the popularity and ridership grows, look to also expand the number of vehicles that are within this type of service. So here's a 4-year service plan. It's conceptual. It could change. Of course, if it's very successful the first year, you might skip a couple of steps, but this is meant to just show how the cost can increase over time, as well as what the potential funding might look like. Fare only pays for a small portion of transit, and this is true for all transit, less so for express services, but it's not going to pay for the entire service. It's still going to require a major local contribution, and we just wanted to make you aware of that. Next slide just kind of shows the same thing, how over that 4-year time frame, service can be expanded from weekdays to Saturdays as well, and increase the number of hours, fares, and as well as the vehicle requirements. So moving on from microtransit, we also want to talk about flex routes, which is very similar to microtransit, but I guess a lot more just that fixed and a more of a defined route, similar to a regular route that you see for Valley Metro or the Zoom, but has a little bit of flexibility, in particular in some of the tail ends. So the line that's shown here on the map in yellow runs roughly from where we're at today, as well as the future Goodyear Civic Square, over to the interchange of roughly the 202, as well as where Indian School, just north of Indian School, you have a lot of distribution centers. Same thing down on the southern end of Cotton Lane and Baseline Road, you have additional distribution centers, and then those that are just south of our location currently, all shown in yellow. So this type of route could serve those jobs really well, because they're laid out in really large blocks. Some of those streets are half a mile apart. So again, not ideal to just drop people off and make them walk more than half a mile to get from the bus stop to the actual door of their workplace. So this is a route that could have a little bit more flexibility. Typically would use a vehicle such as a paratransit type cutaway bus, so smaller than a regular 40-foot bus. But sort of a hybrid of fixed route service and microtransit. This could also be tied to the shift times in some of these areas, because we've had conversations with many of these major employers, and it sounds like Christina's had additional. This is something that we could look to employ and work for a lot of people.
We're gonna keep going so we can get to the end of the presentation. We're running a little bit out of time because you have a CFD meeting coming up, but we do want to finish the slides.
Go ahead.
All right, so moving on to mobility hubs. We mentioned this real briefly earlier, that these are essentially micro transit centers or enhanced bus stops where you can have more amenities than just an overhead shelter and a bench, but things such as wayfinding, bike racks, shared mobility, lockers such as like Amazon lockers and charging stations, car share. And what these might look like They can either be on-street or they can be off-street. They could be at places like the future Goodyear Civic Square, which is what's recommended along with Avondale Civic Center, Cherry Mountain Community College, because there's a lot of space there at the existing parking lots. And then these other secondary locations are more on-street facilities, with the exception of the ballpark and the town center. They would be either just expanded bus stops. So here's an example of what that might look like. And then we wanted to share one example from Goodyear Ballpark, from just an aerial view, how you can retrofit some of the existing land use to accommodate some of these different amenities. So this is at the intersection of Estrella Parkway and Yuma Road, just west of the ballpark. And then just wanted to also summarize all of the recommendations. So the way we have them divided are improvements to existing transit services, new transit services such as Microtransit, Flex, and Flex Route, and then the new capital facilities such as these major and minor mobility hubs. Here's a potential implementation or phasing plan for all of these different service and capital investments. For the city of Avondale, we had a couple of immediate priority, such as changing the Avondale Zoom. But because things like Microtransit take a little bit more time to get started with finding the right contractor, figuring out what the policy is going to be, just getting the contract going, it's probably going to take a couple of years to get that going. But some of the other Valley Metro expansion could also happen within that time frame. And then obviously the mobility hub, either trying to fit that into the existing or the Civic Square plans or some of these other locations that's also going to require a little bit of time.
Questions? Go ahead.
I think they want to see this next slide. Go ahead.
So I think fortunately, you all have been asking about costs as we've gone through this, but got a couple more slides that just kind of break it down, and these might take a little more time to digest later. But we wanted to show the annual operating costs for all of the service recommendations and how they have different funding sources or potential funding sources. Some of those are being used today. Some of them could be in the future. And we do the same thing. All this is in your packet for the capital recommendations as well. But those are mostly one-time costs. We did include the maintenance, but that's something else to consider, and how those can also, they have various funding sources. And then lastly, we just wanted to show today how the funding breakdown is pretty straightforward with a combination of federal, state, regional funding, a lot of general fund as well. But there's an opportunity to look at an increase or a local tax, as well as partnerships with some of the major employers and entities here within Goodyear and Avondale to kind of diversify that funding breakdown. And that would also reduce your general fund amount if you were to go that route. So,
I think we like the diversified. Yeah.
So we have about 5 minutes
Yes.
to give you an opportunity for some questions.
All right. Council? Laura?
It's so interesting, having gone to presentations several years ago talking about microtransit and mobility hubs, and now it's something that's before us. And I think in order for Goodyear to be a contemporary modern city, these are important things that we need to implement. I wanted to comment about what the mayor said about our bus stops. I think if we want to change the perception of public transit, we need to change the environment. I think our mobility hubs also need to be appealing and attractive and inviting to keep that modern look. I think what you've proposed is sweeping and very inclusive, a lot of things, but I'm thrilled to see so many different types. We're not just relying on what we've always done. I really see the future coming in, and I'm very excited.
Thank you.
Well said. Any other comments? Bill?
I definitely want to echo those remarks. There's a lot, I think there's a lot to digest in this slide presentation. A lot of new ideas, a lot of questions about how do we pay for it, where do we go. It was something that we talked about adding to the strategic plan, and I think the strategic plan goal was to study it, which now we've done. Mm-hmm. Where do we go from here? I'd like to maybe see another work session or even something at the retreat, another time to talk about what does the future look like. Get this information, digest it. The PowerPoint presentation is 35 or 40 slides. The actual report is another 115 or something like that. But if we want to set it up as we saw like 2 or 3 slides ago, this is going to be a 2 or 3 year, how do we chart the course? I would hate for us to have spent all of this time and effort to do a study and then go, okay, well, we talked about transit and let's move on to the next thing. If we're going to do it, I think we're at the time now when we need to do it, and I would just encourage us to either do another work session or add it to the retreat agenda or something. But I think we need to decide what we're going to do, particularly since we're losing our muscle in having our own UZA with Avondale. Once that gets absorbed into the greater thing, we're just going to become a sliver in this whole transit discussion. So we've got some good timing, especially with our participation at will soon be the chair level at Valley Metro in a couple of years. We've got a really good opportunity to take advantage of all that. And
Good
just
idea.
Encourage us.
So the 2 of your council people have spoken. Oh, we'll get a third one. And at the end of it, let's just be sure somebody's nodding their heads so we can get a kind of a feel.
Yeah, I think a further discussion would be appropriate. Personally, I'd like to see a pro forma if we look at a specific area to test it, see what kind of usage we get, what kind of ridership, and also in that diversification, I'd like to see maybe some fees, something reasonable that would be charged other than just other sources of funding, whether it's our fund, state, federal tax. But yeah, it'd be nice to see a pro forma as we start looking at some of these other discussions. And if we try to take an area, test it, see how it works, see what kind of, reception we get. I think that would really be nice because you don't want to drop it all at once. You want to see what how this thing all works. So I agree with Councilmember Stipp, a little further, extension. I'd like to see more of the mechanics, being a numbers guy, on how all this kind of ties in, who's going to use it, how much they're going to use, and maybe a reasonable fee, so.
Councilmember Loretano?
I agree with what everyone has said so far. I think either a work session or if we can get it by the retreat to get down to the nitty gritty, because I think that's really important. I agree with Joe that we need to know, like, fees, how much. I also would like to discuss some of the phasing here. It does kind of bother me a little that Estrella is going to have to wait 10 years for no connectivity. So
We would do that a little bit sooner.
Okay,
There's a need.
that is a concern that it's
I was
growing.
actually, I got a phone call that shocked me about 2 weeks ago. Actually came through Valley Metro Customer Service, and then it came to me. And it was one of the board members of the HOA in Estrella saying that some of the residents were asking when we were going to put a park and ride in Estrella. And I was truly surprised because I did not think that anybody in Estrella would want a 40-foot bus in that community. However, when I talked to him a little bit about some of the options that we were going to be presenting this evening and encouraged him to watch the presentation, he said, well, that sounds great. And he agreed with me because he's lived up there forever that he wouldn't want to see a 40-foot bus up there. But can we do something where we can take a collective group of people out of Estrella, bring them down, either hook them up with the park and ride, hook them up to a regional transit bus that's paid for by Proposition 400, something like that. There's genuine interest just to try to get them a little bit closer to the rest of the Valley Metro system.
And that's what I was thinking, some sort of bridge gap until we can get
Exactly.
that up. That would be great because there is a lot of also amenities the city has down there, and we do have a lot of retired people, and we're just growing like crazy over there with the new community. So I would appreciate that. But I think another follow-up would be great to get to the nitty-gritty. And also, as we're getting those numbers, what kind of sales tax other cities have, how much do they get from them, so we can kind of get some actual hard numbers.
Absolutely. And I have to say this. I begged James to put a slide in here about air-conditioned bus stops, but we just didn't have the time. We are looking at much better bus stops. It's just a matter of where we're going to put the service. There are bus stops that have, or bus shelters that have solar on them that can provide a more comfortable environment. So it's not off the table. We definitely want to look at that as well.
Any other question or comments? I think council did a great job giving you a number of things.
Really do
and you
appreciate
can
your feedback. Thank you.
really tell by each of the comments what they prefer as far as creating this. So, okay, thank you very much. Thank you, James, very
Thank
much
you.
for being there. All right, we have a CFD meeting that begins at 5:50. We're a little late. And following by a regular meeting at 6. So the other was adjourned and no further, okay? So we're now on the CFD.